Today has been a quite a
If you are not speaking, please put yourself on mute. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here this afternoon. And welcome to this very special webinar, Mental Health Issues Affecting Haitian-American Children in the US. My name is Mike Moise, and I'm a board member of the Louverture Culture Society. Today, we are pleased to welcome a very special guest, Dr. Jean-Claude Dutesse. He will be sharing with us his expert opinion on this very important topic. Dr. Jean-Claude Dutesse is a retired faculty member and former head of the neuropsychology section at the College of Osteopathic Medicine at the Michigan State University. He is a licensed psychologist in Florida and Michigan. And he has more than 35 years of clinical experience in the fields of clinical, cross-cultural, rehabilitation, and neuropsychology. His second retirement occurred recently after serving as a cross-cultural consultant at the Lou and Anne-Marie and Wellness Center in the College of Nursing at Florida State University. Dr. Dutesse has published in his field and has volunteered his professional services to the Haitian community here and in Haiti. He describes himself as a student of history and believing that a healthy cultural identity to encounter negative stereotypes is a strong foundation for a healthy self-esteem in immigrants. He helped to found the Louverture Culture Society to promote Haitian history and culture in Florida. Dr. Dutesse is the editor of Louverture, our quarterly newsletter, and Zami Detroit, another newsletter that is also devoted to Haitian history and culture. With that, I ask that you give your full attention to Dr. Dutesse and help me in welcoming him. Dr. Dutesse, sir, please take it away.
Thank you, Mike, for this introduction. And I would like to welcome everyone who has joined us on this Saturday afternoon. We have a lot to cover, and then given the time that we have, I would ask people to write questions and then to hold them back, and I'll try to keep it to 45 minutes at most, or speaking time at most, and at least maybe about 40 minutes. That way we can have the last 15 minutes for a question and answer period. Okay. May I have the first slide, please? Well, the purpose of this presentation is to pretty much share information about factors that seems to have had an impact, that seems to have had and continue to have an impact on Haitian immigrant children. This is based on both reading the research literature in the area, which is fairly limited, my clinical experience working with refugee Haitians in Central Michigan, and directing an outpatient clinic for families and children here in Central Florida. The presentation is not a treatment intervention. I'm not going to diagnose anybody, neither would you leave here with the ability to diagnose people based on the information that would be shared. However, you will have an idea, if you were to go to a mental health person, how to prepare for the first interview, and if you have children, signs and indications that would suggest that something is there and that you may want to look into things further. Okay. I have no conflict of interest. I am currently retired, so I'm not promoting any clinics or any mental health professional. So I'm basically functioning right now as an educator. Okay. So mental health, what it is. Let's just take a look at the definition of mental health from the World Health Organization. A state of well-being in which every individual realizes, that's the key word here, realizes, that suggests work, his or own potential. When I see the word potential here in this context, I'm thinking about the brain. Okay, realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life. Okay, it doesn't say with the excess stresses of life, just the normal stresses of life. Okay, so there is room there to know that when something overwhelms us, okay, so there is going to be some disequilibrium, okay, and then we want to get back to normal. But life itself is stressful. They can work productively. You cannot be healthy if you're not productive. You cannot be healthy if you always depend on somebody else. Productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Just living your own life as though you were on an island without anybody around you will not make you healthy. You got to have that exchange with other people within the community. So making a contribution. The contribution can be as small as calling your neighbor to see how the neighbor is doing, okay, all the way to giving large sums of money, as many of us are doing, working as volunteers in many different projects, okay. So we have well-being. The person is able to realize his potential. And if you really think about it, what is it that we do? We come into the world with the ability to become something or someone. How do we become that? We have to negotiate societal constraints, societal demands, and the force and the tension within ourselves to assert or to express those things within us that's going to make us the person that we are going to be. So it's a balancing act. So you're always going to have to deal with people. At the same time, you got to fall back on yourself and then find ways to negotiate with whatever system is around you so you can find that space for happiness or for self-actualization. Let's talk about scope now. We're looking at 10 to 20% of children worldwide. That's a fairly large number of children that are at risk for mental health problems. That doesn't mean that they have a mental health disorder. It means that they could have one, depending on what's going on around them and out there, the families and the systems around them help them mitigate and negotiate the different issues that they are facing. And why is that important? Why are mental health issues important? For children, the very first thing that it is going to impact is going to be education. And then the other thing, that critical thing actually that it impacts, is life. There has been a rising in suicide in children. Okay, so that's extremely important that we pay attention to that. People tend to think of death has been linked to medical health. Well, death by suicide is linked to mental health. And that's a factor that some people in the Haitian community have been grappling with. Right? And then the other one is that if you think about Maslow's talk about self-actualization, which means that be all that you can be, in other words, use the full extent of the potential within your brain to be the person that you can be, you can't really, that can become at risk. Okay. That can be adversely affected if you have persistent mental health issues that are not addressed. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to go there fairly quickly. These are elements of a healthy self. It is not a list that you have to check to say, oh, I've got that, so therefore I am healthy. We don't usually have all of these elements all at once. But if you look at your life, you will see that from time to time you have this, from time to time you have that, and from time to time you have most of them. And if you don't have some of the other ones, you probably are working at developing that skill or developing that ability. The very first one is really self-love, which is the corner of self-esteem. Once you love yourself, there are certain things that you are not going to accept. There's things that you are not going to do. You are going to carry yourself in a certain way that creates the desire for other people to respond toward you with consideration and respect. Okay, be able to love and be loved. Some people, depending on what's happening in their life, can be so damaged that love threatens them. Okay, they have issues with that. They cannot love anybody else, but they can drain other people, but they cannot love somebody else. Having confidence in your ability. Confidence relate to self-efficacy, which is the belief that you can do something, the belief that you can learn something in spite of whatever difficulties that you are facing. Be able to experience a broad range of emotions, not be stunted into only having fear and or pleasure or anxiety and or joy or bliss, but be able, there's a whole range of emotions that we people experience, is to be able to allow yourself to experience them, to learn from them, and to use those emotions to guide your decisions. Okay. To be all rational is not good. To be all emotional is not good, because in either way you are going to miss something. Okay. Having the capacity to integrate thoughts and emotions, I kind of implied it when I spoke about using your emotions to inform your decisions, and then using your rationality, using your thoughts, okay, to put your feelings into perspective. Feelings emerge without us having any control over them. The control we have once we know them is how we process them and what we are going to do about them. Many feelings we have are related to experiences that we have had that we are not even aware that we have the experiences. And that's the thing with the brain. The brain is always learning without you aware that the brain is learning. If you're exposed to something that is repeated over time, over and over again, guess what? You'll learn it. And guess what? If you don't want that inside yourself, you're going to have to work to get it out. We all know about commercials, right? When you go to the supermarket, you find yourself wanting certain type of cereals, a certain type of other objects. Think about that. Okay. Maintaining a positive outlook toward the past and the future. The past is important. It informs the present, and then it also helps you create what the future is going to be to some extent. But the ability to let go of it when it's extremely painful, to the point where it becomes a barrier to your growth, you have to be able to look at it. So the capacity to have some sort of an optimistic outlook is critical. Can work and be productive. I'm not going to say anything about that. I already covered earlier. Able to develop and maintain relationships has to do with love and then being loved. Being able to communicate with people, to relate with people, to understand other people. That way you will be able to get the support we need in return, and able to communicate to your community. Next one, please. Next slide. Being in touch with reality. If I believe I am Napoleon, I believe I am Dessalines, if I believe I'm some alien, if I believe I am the greatest lover in the world, well, I am not going to do much in life, because that's going to put me on the path that's going to create conflict with other people. So this is, when we talk about reality here, we're talking about people who are psychotic, people who are dreaming while they are alive, not dreaming in the sense that we dream in hope, but people who are having, that would be more like seeing things that are disturbing and painful while they are awake, like having hallucination and things like that. Okay. Having the ability to grow and to adapt as needed, the brain gives us the ability to be flexible. Flexibility is key. If you are inflexible, you probably will not live very long, and you will not be able to get along with people. Being capable to resolve problems at an age-appropriate age. That's very critical. Growing up in Haiti, being the oldest boy, and in some cases the first child, I got punished many times because I should have known, because I am the oldest. But nobody taught me. Nobody guided me. Nobody told me this is what I needed to do in this new situation. Okay. But I was held responsible because I was the oldest. Children are not little adult. They are people too, but their thoughts and processes and their feelings and their development differ. at different age, they can handle different things. So we have to keep that in mind and always think in terms of helping children learn versus finding fault and holding them uh, to some sense of false accountability, which is going to diminish their self-esteem. Being able to tolerate and manage pain, and I'm using pain here in the physical sense of the world because we have illness, we have other things that an accident that bring pain to us, and suffering. Suffering, I'm using that term here to refer to the psychological dimension of our physical pain, the psychological unpleasantness of life. Having the ability to play and to use and appreciate humor. Being able not to take yourself seriously is critical. Being able to laugh at yourself is critical. Okay. Because it allows you to begin to let go and then to refocus. Being able to play, to engage in some sort of playful activity allows you to rejuvenate, allows you to kind of rekindle the child within you. And humor is a very nice way to deflate very difficult situations and to allow you to look at the other side. Next slide, please. What I want to remember is that to develop these capacities or these abilities, which start at conception, okay, but their realization is affected by biological predisposition. We all have a brain, but our brain is the same, but they don't really, it is built the same, but the allocation of the resources is different. That's why you have some people are extremely good at music and they don't really have to spend a lot of time playing music. I could do whatever I want. I would never be a great musician. Okay. I can be a mediocre one. Okay. Because my brain kind of the allocation to that area was much less than the allocation, for instance, to the verbal area. I can talk a whole lot and I can acquire information verbally or in writing fairly quickly and fairly easily. Okay. So this is what I think what we Haitian refer to un don, I mean, something that you have talent in an area. So the brain is physically the same, but the allocation of the resources in terms of the cognitive abilities are different. That predisposes us. This is where the potential lies. Now, in order for the potential to become concrete, to materialize itself, we have to negotiate with who is around us, starting with our parents, our peers, and then the larger society. All right, next slide, please. Now, this is a basic hardware here, kind of a summary of what I've been kind of implying that the brain is important and critical. The brain is central to survival. Without the brain, okay, there is no life. It depends, though, although the brains determine to what extent how far we are going to go, right? What we do, our behaviors, okay, and the experiences we have in turn determine the trajectory of the way our brain are going to develop, the trajectory of the sets of skills that we are going to acquire and when we are going to acquire it. Okay. And as I said, it has built-in biological predispositions, which as parent, what we usually do is to try to get our children to be the best at what they can do. Okay, next one, please. The brain develops at different functions at different age. For instance, a child can seem to be very inattentive at a certain phase, at 2 years old, where they're exploring, because at that phase they're supposed to explore. You have a different child at 8 years old. Okay. By that time, the attention system within the child has developed sufficiently where he or she is going to be able to sit and focus and work on certain problems that require concentration. It is plastic. That's the key here. If you don't remember anything, remember that. The brain is plastic. It means that it changes in response to experiences. Now, if the experiences are bad, it also has an adverse consequence on the brain. The experiences are good in the sense that they are growth enhancing. So you have a richer brain, and then you become, quote, a smarter person. Okay. So plastic, the brain changes. Remember again, the brain changes, the brain growth is behavior dependent. Okay. Before there can be a mind, there has to be a brain. Okay. If you think of the mind is the sets of experiences that are encoded in terms of your memory that develops kind of over time, which allow you to begin to form certain views of the world. As human beings, we can step aside and then look at ourselves. Okay. And then once you can do that, this is what the mind is. But for you to be able to do that, you have to be able to develop sets of values, sets of beliefs. Okay. As we grew up, we acquire a tremendous amount of information that is passed culturally. We acquire information that don't even pay attention to because it is repeated over and over again. And then that determines how we are going to view things. This detachment, this ability to see ourselves, this is kind of clearly part of the mind, what the mind does. Next slide, please. Mental illness, what's important here, you can have mental health problem and then not have a mental illness, okay, necessarily. Mental illness means that it is a condition that has been diagnosed using certain very stringent criteria, okay? Because once you get into that area, treatment differs, the approach differs. Mental health problems can be dealt with through support, through conversation, through friendships, through parenting. But when you get into mental illness, specialized care is usually required. Okay. But the key I wanted to point here, when we get into mental illness, there is an alteration in thinking. The person is thinking differently, right? There's an alteration in mood. The way the person feels is different. Okay? In behavior, the way the person acts is different. Right? And not only that, it is associated with suffering. Okay? And it prevents you from being who you can be or from working on being who you can be. There is an impairment, right? You are diminished to some level during that period. Just like when you're physically sick, you are also diminished to some level. So that's a mental disorder. Right? Next slide, please. Now, there are some risk factors that all children, and I wanted to cover that briefly before I get into some of the factors that seems to be specific to the immigrant children population, and some of which seem to be specific to Haitians because our culture is kind of different. Okay, the set of experiences we have are somewhat different. Very first one is pregnancy. What kind of pregnancy you have? Okay, if you have a difficult pregnancy, that could put the child at risk, the baby at risk. Okay. You have genetic conditions and hereditary conditions, okay? There is really, at this point in time, I'm not aware of any one-to-one mental illness that is passed from one to the other, but it is familiar. Schizophrenia tends to run in families. Bipolar disorder or depression tend to run in families. ADHD tend to run in families, anxieties, and so on. So in other words, there are things that are beyond our control that we are born with. All we can do is to manage it, and that starts with pregnancy. Health of the parents, both father and mother. The birth process, is it a difficult birth? Is it a cesarean birth? How long did labor last? And did was the fetus in any way traumatized by the process? Okay. Head trauma. Head trauma is critical. 0 to 5, you have the highest percentages of head trauma in children. And head trauma can have lifelong effects. And then one of the lifelong effects is going to be disturbance in the attention system. So, all right, let me move on. Early life conditions, how nurturing the environment is. Uh, um, Food is an issue in some places, like in Haiti, where children cannot be fed or cannot be fed adequately or cannot be fed on a regular basis. That will impact the development of the brain. Okay, and then that could become a problem later on in life. Okay, how nurturing the environment is. Okay, is the infant getting the attention that he or she needs to basically grow and develop? Family life. Is it a single parent? Are there two parents? Are there problems between the parents? Okay. The more unstable the family life, the less attention the infant is going to get. Okay. Abuse and neglect is an extremely big one that traumatize the child and then creates very painful memories and then create a certain set of protective responses in the child that later will would prevent him or her from taking certain risk or from taking too many risks. Okay, and besides creating issues of mistrust and other problems. Uh, Parenting style is kind of critical. And divorce. Divorce in this day and age has become a developmental task. When it occurs, children need special attention for a little while so they can learn to cope with it, deal with it, and transcend it. It's not a sentence, but it's very important to recognize that when you're going through a divorce or a separation, that you need to make time, you need to allocate time to focus on the children or the child that you have. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about immigration. Interestingly, research looking at first generation, like I am a first generation, and I suspect most of you here, I know most of the people on my board are first, all of us, I think, are first generation. In other words, we came here either as a child or as an adolescent, okay, or as an adult. Okay. Now, the second generation are going to be like our children. My son is a second generation and so on. What the research is showing is that people like us, the first generation, we are doing better mentally than our children. Now, there are many reasons for that. And then one of them could be the expectations were lower for us when we first immigrated. Whereas for our children, the expectations are higher. They're also dealing with other systemic factors that we perhaps we're not aware of, did not deal with. One of them is racism. Okay? As you grow up in this country, you become socialized if you are not pretty much a white. If you're a white person, you're likely to be socialized to feel privilege. If you are a black person, it's a developmental task for you to deal with racism, to find a ways to deal with it, maintain your, especially coming from Haiti, maintain your sense of self-esteem, and then deal with the other children and other peers that tend to be much more critical of Haitians than other children. So to make a long story short here, I summarize first generation immigrants, those who were born in their countries have fewer mental health problems than their children. Second generation, those who were born here or who came here at a very, very young age have more mental health problems than children who came to the US as immigrant refugees. Next slide, please. The Palm Beach Country Board of Schools, about 2 years ago, shared some information about Haitian students only and in their performance relative to other students, both academically and behaviorally. And what was surprising to me is that the data clearly, not even suggest, the data clearly indicated that Haitian students are lagging behind all other students, elementary school students. They're all hiding behind all other students in English, in reading, math. They are being expelled at higher rates than all other students. Okay? And then based on that data, the data claim, and I use the word claim here, that they have more behavior problem than others. I use the word claim purposefully because data consists of numbers. So context gives you the interpretation. So you have an immigrant child, okay, coming into a system who does not speak the language, maybe has a history of traumatization as part of the immigration process, okay, and dealing in families that are themselves many times kind of unstable financially and unstable maritally. Things are going on. So when we look at that data, keep in mind that there are a combination of factors that include cultural, systemic racism, family, and personal factors. What I'm saying there is that let's not jump to the conclusion that the Haitian students necessarily are misbehaving, that there's something wrong with them because they are Haitians. I suspect that the system, okay, is looking at them in a very different way and are perhaps quicker, all right, to quote, pick on them than the other students. Because one other thing with the school system is you have to be able to voice your concerns. You have to be able to be an advocate for your child. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to activate the resources that you need basically for your child. Next slide, please. Now, think about the immigration experience. Now we're getting into the Haitian mid part of it. There is a pre-travel, and there is an in-transit while you're traveling, and then there is what happens when you get here. If you think about it in terms of the Haitian migration out of Haiti, you can think about people who came by plane, people who came by boat, and then recently we have a wave of people who actually have walked all the way from South America to California, who have actually walked. And there were children among them. I don't know how many, but the number was not as high as in the 19 and early 1990s. We have a large number of children who came with their parents or who came with surrogate parents. Many times they were strangers, or who basically 11, 12, who basically were on the boat with nobody, or who lost their parents during the transit. Right. Very first thing is for a child is separation from parents. All separations are difficult, okay, and it needs to be handled. And if it's not handled, the memory of it may be repressed, but it can put you at risk for problem with relationships later on, or problem with anxiety later on in life. Stress of living with relatives or in a boarding school. Living with relatives, we know about Haiti. Sometimes the relative take the money and then don't really take care of the child the way they should. Okay. Frequency of contact with parents. Do the parents call? Do they write? How often do they talk with the child? And when they do talk with the child, what is the quality of the talk? In other words, is there sufficient communication to nurture bonding between the parent and the child when they are thousands of miles away? Exposure to negative views. If you're living with relatives, then you're going to hear people are going to make comments about your mom, comments about your dad that you perhaps would not have heard if you were living at home. And that's going to color your perception of your parents. It's also going to color your relationships with your relatives. So you have conflict kind of going there. And whenever you have conflict, think of tension. And also think of a child who is not able to kind of express those things. And then children hear things, and depending on their age, they may take responsibility, whereas the responsibility belongs to somebody else, right? Uh, Fantasy of being with parents again, the nature of the fantasy, how great things are going to be for some cases. Once I live here, my mother loves me, my father loves me, I'm going to be with them. And sometimes that doesn't bear out. Uh, Raise expectation. Raise expectation is a really, really big one. So you're coming, they sell you just coming to this US here. You're going to have this great life. All things are going to be hunky dory. And then you come here, and this is particularly critical for the middle class Haitian. And then when you come here, you quickly realize, especially if you're like an adolescent, that something is different here. The neighborhood that I am in is somewhat discrepant in some ways than the neighborhood from which I came from. Okay, and then you begin to experience what they call material deprivation. Your family cannot sustain the level of the lifestyle that they used to have in Haiti, and the lifestyle that you are enjoying relative to your peers, and many times the lower middle class Americans, okay, to you is much inferior. There has been uh, case histories of suicide related to that when our children internalize negative views of themselves, look at their circumstances and see it in a negative way, and translate that into a low self-esteem, and they question why they should be alive. Okay. Abuse by parent or surrogates. Okay. Permissive parenting. Uh, Usually, when parents leave Haiti, maybe grandma or grandpa, usually grandma comes in and then to stay with the children. Grandma is much more permissive, so you're used to much more freedom. And then when you come to the US and your parents want you to be a little boy, a little girl, and say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Okay. That creates conflict and create tension within the family unit. And depending on the child experiences, depending on if you had very few contact. Now, I have worked with children and parents who, what the parents did while here and the child was in Haiti was to send money. And then they figured that, okay, I've done my share, and then the child is taken care of, and then they're working on getting the child here. But there's really been very little contact. No letters. You know that many of our people are illiterate, so writing letters is a problem. We have moved to sending tapes. Some people can afford to buy the tapes. There's some problems that interfere with communication with the child. So the child grows up, and then knowing that there is a parent, but there is no emotional bond between that child and the parent. And then when the child comes to the US, the parents automatically expect the child to love them, okay, to respect them, okay, and to obey them. Now, respecting and obedience come easy when there is an easier when there is an emotional bond, okay, because you can weather the tantrum, you can weather the eyes rolling that happens when you say no, the words that teenager will say to you. Um, you can weather that. In other words, there is a sense of shared history that we can have that. So when you have two strangers, and then one is demanding emotional intimacy quickly, that creates conflict and that creates problem. All right. Where was I here? I am at academic problems. One of the problem is whenever you have any kind of mental health issue that you're dealing with, anything uh, that is of preoccupation to you, the first cognitive function that is going to be impacted, it's going to be your attention. Right? Think about it. Okay, it's going to be your attention. You can't focus. You're very distractible because you have something else that is creating tension within you that is not yet addressed. So you can only focus on things partially. A child with an unstable home environment, he goes to school, probably will require at least three repetitions of the same thing before it goes in. The child heard it, but it was did not translate into meaning. Okay. So guess what happened? That particular child gets left behind. So academic problems will result. Late or no formal schooling, so the child starts later, the child is older, but he has to be with peers that are much younger than him, and that can create self-esteem issues. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. During the process, you have all kinds of possible traumatic situation. Transportation. If you came by plane, yeah, it usually was a very pleasant ride, right? Okay. It's quick, it's short. How long it how long did the voyage take? How long did the trip take? When we meet people who basically walked from Brazil, catch a plane to Colombia, and then from Colombia, they do the rest by feet, walking through Panama, all the jungles, keep going all the way, and then walking through Mexico to get all the way to the U.S. border. And there's all kinds of things happening on the road. So this is not an experience that you can quickly discharge if you're a child. Okay. Whether you were with your parents, that's one thing, or whether you were with a caring adult who act like a surrogate parent, or whether you were with a stranger, or whether you were by yourself. Loss of supportive adults. Let's say you were with somebody and that person dies. The possibility for being victimized, for women to be raped and sexually harassed. I tested a young woman in Michigan, and then she was 12 years old in 1993, and then she was in the camp, Guantanamo camp, and in there was another slightly older young boy who made her life miserable, harassing her. And then she had a lot of nightmares when she was finally settled and in dealing with that period of her life. Okay. I'm glad to say that she did transcend that, and then she was able to move on beyond that. Whether you were detained or incarcerated, right? Racism, ethnocentrism, sexism. You're coming from a place where people look at you one way. I mean, nobody really worried about your vacation. You come over here now, all of a sudden, you are dirty Haitian. All of a sudden, you are smelly Haitian. All of a sudden, you are boat people, or all kinds of other things. Okay? That is an assault on your sense of self. That's an assault on your self-esteem. And then that requires ways for you to cope with it. Next, please. Am I doing on time? All right. The reunification with parents, as I mentioned earlier, can be very difficult depending on the expectation. If you had some emotional bonding, so emotional intimacy is not going to be an issue. Otherwise, what you have here, you have two strangers. Even when the child is little, 3, 4, 5, okay? Not having had that bond with, quote, the mom or the mother is going to be can be a very big issue. Parents and child attitude toward each other, change in lifestyle that I kind of refer to when I talk about material deprivation. When you move into an area and then when you come into the US and then the money is not as available, so the resources are limited, so the lifestyle is going to change. Okay. It could be like eating together on Sunday is no longer an issue. Everybody is eating as quickly as they can because people have to go to work. It could be like you used to go for a little walk after meal, a little walk in the evening that people used to do in Haiti. Over here, you can't do that depending on the neighborhood where you live. Concerns about crime, loneliness, being in overcrowded homes. While working at the center, I met parents where people were sleeping in shifts. Okay. And with children, really had no place to sleep. Frequent housing changes. So for the child, always facing new peers. Every time you meet new peers, it's a task for you. It's something that you have to do differently. And that kind of becomes a problem. Family financial stress, contacts with child welfare agencies. They're extremely difficult and traumatic for both children and Haitian parents. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that you should not report, you should not do your due diligence and then comply with the laws. But keep in mind that if you can, well, it's very difficult because I'm getting into therapy here, and then let me kind of stay where I am. neglect and abuse, reversal of roles. In many cases, with many of our families, the child picks up the language much quicker than the parents do. Okay, and the parents become dependent on the child many times to translate, to be the bridge with agencies, to be the spokesperson. And sometimes, and some children abuse that, and some children also develop. Um, they begin to see their parents as lesser than, and that becomes a problem. They begin to challenge their authority because they know that they're depending on them. Okay. Um, the parentifical child. I work with a family where there is an older child who's 10 years old. He was late to school every day because mom goes to work at 5 a.m. in the morning. So he has to get up and make breakfast for sisters and brothers who were 4 and 3. Okay. And mom had made some arrangement to pick up the 3-year-old to some daycare. So this boy could not get to elementary school, okay, before 9 a.m. That's a family problem. Okay, but these are the reality. Okay. Um, family life stability. Oh, parents dating. That's a critical one. We sometimes don't think about that. Whenever when the parents leave the home, the child tends to move in into the vacuum, and then the relationship between the parents can become even closer. If it's a mom, mom talks about dad, what's going on. Usually, fathers don't have custody. And then when there is another person coming into the environment abruptly, the child is displaced, and there are feelings of being abandoned. And it's not at all the present feelings for adults. You can imagine for children who can't explain that. Usually the response is going to be a lot of temper tantrum. I remember a lady came to me for advice, which when I was a psychologist, and then she was telling me that her daughter, who was 5 years old at the time, started having temper tantrums. And then she was being, quote, needy and whiny, wanting her attention more and more. So I'm going about my thing, and looking at what that could be and so on. And then I never thought to ask her whether she was dating. I know she was divorced, whether she was dating newly and so on. And then one day I just was passing by and I saw her walk, and her boyfriend came to visit her. And then when I saw her next time, I said, "Well, how long have you been dating this guy? How long has Heather been exposed to this gentleman?" And then she began to tell me. And what we found was that her problems, the child's problem, coincided with the first night that the guy spent over. What happened then? She used to sleep with mom. Now mom put her in the bedroom. Okay. Let's move on. Now, I use an example involving a woman that also happened with men who have their children during visitation, or where they just let the child at grandma's and then paying all the attention to their girlfriend. That's a problem. The child is aware of that. Although grandma may feel the voice, but the attention he would have gotten from dad is not the same. Okay. Neighborhood safety. Neighborhood safety tends to cause our family, our Haitian people, to be overly protective. Okay. And then that's a problem because if your parents are too safe, you're not going to have the experience that would allow you to develop the kinds of skills you need to deal with danger, to deal with the bad elements, okay, whoever they might be, or the good ones. Okay. Material deprivation, I referred to that before. A factor that I saw in the Haitian community is what I call hyper religiosity or religious stress. That has nothing to do with spirituality. This has to do with pressure to attend churches for a certain number of times, for a certain number of hours that are very long, to the point where that interferes with the children's homework time. It interferes with the child parent time. Because if you focus on Jesus, if you focus on God, you're not focused on your child the time that you focus, okay? When you're doing those religious routines. If you so focus on the afterlife, you are not focused on this life. Okay. And there are also tremendous financial stress for a segment of our population because they have to make a significant contribution based on their salary to their church. And that feeds into the material deprivation when they can't purchase certain things for the children, when they can't send them or allow them to go to certain trips. Parent empathic distress. This is term I got from Dr. Gerda Nicola, who is another clinical psychologist who did a lot of research on the Haitians' adjustment, the effect of the migration process, and so on. And what she's referring to here as empathic distress is the pressure that adult Haitians experience to take care of parents back home. Okay, tremendous pressure. People call them, people ask for money. It seems like they're not always very happy when they're calling to ask for money. There's a lot of guilt-inducing words that are said, and it's a very painful experience. Okay, but we do it. So she refers to it as empathic distress. This is you feeling bad for doing a good thing, which is not appreciated to the level that you would hope. The school is a whole ball of game. It's a whole new game. You have the language issues. You have the class issue that causes. Even with Haitian teachers, okay, because we know our little sector, we know our little group, so we think that our little group represents Haitian culture. No, it represents a sector, okay, of Haiti, and then you have to be thoughtful and considerate and listen and learn to see where people are coming from. Okay. And although there are many, I've also met many good teachers and then school counselors who are very sensitive and are aware of that, and they're doing their best to help the children adjust to the school and also be an advocate for them. Peer relationship is a huge one. This is where you get bullying, okay, with other children not liking you. Many times when a child is having a problem, he or she does not want to go to school. And if that occurs, always pay attention, go to the school, make some time to spend with the child. Don't go at it directly, okay? But just by spending time, the child will begin to reenact or replay kind of what is happening. Then that will give you a cue why the child may not want to go to school, okay? Next slide, please. Persistent presence of these issues over time in a family or child can lead to mental illness and can also lead to mental disorders. The word here is can because it all depends on how parent responds, how school responds, how the caring people, well, how the adults who come into contact with this child behave. If they behave like caring adults, okay, they become an olive branch, and that can become what the child needs, the bridge to walk from an unpleasant situation to a much more pleasant one. Next slide, please. Now, can you guys hear me? How are we doing on time here? Hello?
Dr. Dutens, we are running out. We are running late a little bit. So, we appreciate you taking a couple of questions as you may feel that if you can go a little bit over the next slide that you have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The rest of the talk has to do with the characteristics of the disorders. So I am going to go through them fairly quickly, and then through the answer to the question and answer session, I may be able to elaborate. Okay. If you think about anxiety, excessive fears, okay, the fears can vary. Sometimes they would vary with they're attached to a specific situation, sometimes a specific person, sometimes a specific event. The key here is that there is fear, and then the fear seems to be exaggerated, or there is anxiety, a concern, a sense of insecurity, which about something that may be happening into the future. Next one, please. Or with anxiety, what you usually have avoidance. The person begins to avoid the situation or the person that is causing the anxiety, and then that decreases, and then they're able to function. Okay. but it's not a good way. Avoidance is not a good way to deal with a stressor. Trauma-induced, there's reactive attachment problems. The child seems to have no animation, does not respond at all. Okay. The another facets of that, this is what the DSM-5 call this inhibited social engagement. Now, this is a child, again, responding to, was adapted to neglect, to the trauma of neglect by being fearless, overly friendly. You know, you just meet the child and then they start playing with you and touching you, and then you have to set the limit. It's above and appropriate the age for the child, because most children, they would let you in, but on their own terms, okay? They have to gauge you somewhat. These children, they have no capacity for appraisal. They just go with whoever's there. So they're usually at risk for abuse, okay? Post-traumatic stress disorder, many people talk about it. So it's an event that you observe and then that you were told about. If it's a child, it involved the parent or a caring adult. What are some traumatic experiences? For instance, father abusing mother, physical abuse, I mean, domestic violence. That's clearly, definitely traumatic. Bullying, depending on bullying that depending over time will be traumatic. And then that causes reactions on three levels. It causes reactions in terms of your system is kind of wired up, okay? So you become fearful, so you're always startling, so you become a little somewhat vigilant. The other thing is that you have images that comes to you, intrusive images about the incidents that comes to you that kind of disturb you. You begin to think, the way you think about things a certain way, your growth, emotional growth becomes somewhat stunted because you're trying to avoid and then to defend and preserve yourself. All right, next one, please. Depressive disorders, let's talk to them in terms of two groups. One of them is what we would call bipolar. When it comes to children, what you have persistent tantrum, acting out behaviors, either verbally and or physically aggressive. They are usually extremely irritable. Every little thing seems to set them off. And this is above and beyond what you would expect for this for the child's age, okay? That can develop gradually. This is not necessarily a reaction to a traumatic experience, okay? This might be one of the things that the child came into the world with. The best way to kind of determine that is to get a good family history if you're a clinician, because that tends to run in families, okay? Major depressive disorder, there's tremendous sadness and then lack of interest in life, okay? And then it lasts. Now you can have all of those things that doesn't last very long, but if it's persistent and lasting, then you probably have a severe problem and are moving toward a mental health disorder. I think this is the last slide, I believe. My favorite one. Attention deficit disorder. As I said, attention, you can have attention problem that would be due to emotional pressure. That would be due to fear. That will be due to anxiety. You also have attention problem that the child is born with as a condition of the way his brain is structured, the way the circuits of the brain work for him, okay? And what you usually have inattentiveness, you have hyperactivity. You can have hyperactivity. The child's always moving and doing things without problem with attention, okay? And then the other thing, you can have the two type combined where you have hyperactivity and inattention. Usually that requires a psychologist to do an evaluation to determine that kind of what's going on, or the parents completing some behavioral skills. Because when you have attention deficit disorder, you're going to have some impulsivity, you're going to have problem with organization and problem with sustaining focus over time, okay? I think I'll stop here. I think this is the last slide, correct? Yeah, the last slide is, let's go back to the last slide quickly. Thank you. These are all the things that I have been saying. These are behavioral observations suggestive of a mental health problem. increased whining and crying, irritability, disturbed sleep, fear of going to bed alone, nightmare. Now, there are night terrors, which is kind of a normal experiences that kids around 6, 7 have. That's different. This is persistent, recurrent nightmares. Okay, fear of being alone. The child regresses. The child who was toilet trained all of a sudden start having accidents. Okay, the child who was pretty comfortable, seeming very autonomous, all of a sudden is needy and crying and whining, wanting the parents' attention all the time. There is something going on. Aggressive outbursts, so striking out, increased physical activity that doesn't seem to lead to any production. That it doesn't seem to be productive in any way. Seeming more restless. Decreased participation in activities. The child withdraws. Okay, it's doing less and less and less. Difficulty paying attention that was not there before. Okay. Selective avoidance. School phobia is one of them. The child avoids certain situations, certain people, or certain things. Withdrawal and any statement that the child wants to die, take it seriously. With the internet, with a lot of things that children are exposed to, we're finding that many children are making those statements earlier. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dutes. This was wonderful. I'm sure that our community have learned a lot this afternoon, and we want to apologize because we are out of time. It's actually past 3, but we would definitely appreciate if some of you from the audience or all of you to better yet can stay with us for an additional 10 minutes as we are going to address some of the questions that some of our colleagues pause in the chat. So Dr. Dutes, I am going to actually read some of the comment that we had. Franz Collin wanted to thank you for the presentation, but also wanted to know if within the Haitian community, since there is so much stigma associated with mental illness, it comes across as tough, as though Haitian-Americans and nation do not believe they can be mentally ill. So how is it possible then for us to educate our Haitian brothers and sisters without offending them or labeling them?
Well, I think what the society, what the Louverture Cultural Society is doing, just like my talk today, this is an effort to educate and then to help people understand that mental illness has a physical basis to it. Okay, it's not just quote you're just crazy. There's something wrong with you that cannot be fixed. All societies have, to some degree, do not like mental health professionals. They do not like the idea of mental illness, but they have grown. It has a lot to do with the level of education. The more education we have, the easier it is for us to begin to see things differently. I know within the community there are clinics, outpatient clinics that serve children and Haitian families, specifically in Palm Beach counties. And then when I was director, we didn't have enough spot. For the referrals that we were getting. Okay. Now, many parents, they would not go themselves, but they will take their children to get the assistance. And then once they do that, then they begin to understand that a lot of the misperceptions of mental illness is pretty much clarified. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dutes. And with this, I will just continue with another question, another comment that Franz Collin made to us. There are truly less mental illness, mental health problem in the first generation, as you stated in your presentation, or is it a matter of denial then that a lot of time that happens?
Well, this is where we go into, remember now, the first generation is coming in with a different cultural perspective, right? So many problems that in a society of affluence, okay, is seen as a problem is not seen as a problem do not create the same level of distress pretty much in this country. Okay, the whole issue of material deprivation that the second generation is dealing with, feeling that they are less than because they do not have all the material means that their neighbors have. All right. Okay. Now, that's something that developed because you are in a society that pushes consumption and then determines your value to some extent based on what you consume. When you cannot consume at that level, if you internalize that, you begin to have a problem. Okay, there have been cases of young Haitian boys getting involved in criminal activities precisely because they're trying to get what the others get. Okay? And they have problem and they look down on their parents, okay, because they feel that their parents failed them for not being able to provide for them at the level that they wish the parent could.
Okay. So I will terminate with one more question. I will end this with one more question from Dana de Maizière, who wanted to, when we were highlighting the risk factors, she said all of them are important, but she was particularly interested in understanding how Haitian parenting style could be adapted to protect Haitian youth. She wanted to know, do you have any experience on how this adaptation could help, the children of Haitian descent?
Well, the thing about Haitian parenting, at least the way I experienced it, and also the way that it came across to me from the work that I did with Haitians primarily here, it's authoritarian, very authoritarian. Okay. Now, families cannot be democratic. Okay. But families must be inspired in America by democratic principles. What I mean by that, the parents have to make decision for the child. How the parents make the decision is what's important. Okay. How to involve the child and then when to involve the child and how to communicate with children at different ages. What I find with the biggest problem I find with Haitian parenting is a lack of investment in teaching the children. Now, when I was in Haiti, you still had the authoritarianism, okay? But parents took parenting as a task. It's a job, c'est job pour milvo, okay? And then they did give you time, whether it was to making sure you know your lessons. There was some time that was spent on you and to you. And then this is critical. And then through that shared experience, the child see that the parent's way of doing things has value because it has helped them do things. But when you have a parenting style where the parent is always ordering, and is never present or seem to have little interest in what the child is actually doing, but interest in the results, you do not have that emotional bond, which is critical in the democratic society to get the child to comply when he wants to do something that his friends wants to do, when you want him to do certain things because of the values that you hold. Okay, so when I work with, I did a lot of parenting. In fact, my doctorate thesis was on parenting, but not Haitian parenting, but it was on parenting at the time. Is to help parents spend time, find the time, okay, to individualize the relationship with each child, even if you have 5. There's a certain way to let that child feel the child is special, okay? And then with that relationship, your wants, where you want the child to go and what you want the child to do becomes easier to communicate to the child and then to get cooperation versus compliance.
Thank you, Dr. Dutes. But there is one more question, if we can take it, but I am going to be asking you because we're getting very close to the 3:15 time. So Lumi Gilo wanted to know about this, what role does social status play in the example that you spoke of? So it seems that the Haitian children are better social privilege and surroundings do not fare any better. So she wanted to know, do you have any experience with this group of Haitian children?
Which one? Those that are more socially privileged?
Yes, sir.
Well, what you see is that depending on what level you are on the social stratum, you have different problems. but you do have problems. They're just different. Okay. Within the with, for instance, middle class Haitians, there's a lot of problem with depression. There's a lot of problem with anxiety. Okay. There's a lot of problem with a lack of self-confidence, and a lot of problem with drug addiction. Okay. And then these issues within the Haitian middle class seems to be primarily centered around authority. The parents seeming to be overprotective, especially of the girls, and then very permissive with the boys to some extent. And then when the boys get in trouble, all of a sudden, Duvalier comes out. Okay. And then they want to do things differently. So all of the classes have problems that relate to migration and then the culture, right? For the middle class Asian, the drop in status, the anonymity, the feeling of being nobody, okay, is an issue that many of them deal with by joining gangs. Okay. So all of the classes, if you think about it, it's not because you are at this level, it's not so much a class problem, it's a migration problem, okay, that when you come in.
Okay. So one of, before we leave our friends, and we are thankful for the ones who were able to stay with us. Thank you so much. We have one more question, but I think, probably we could address that in one of our newsletters, definitely, as we know that, we also have a newsletter. We are but Dr. Duterte, somebody wanted to know, how do parents recognize ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, behavior, and seek help? Basically, how do they recognize it and how do they seek help?
Well, okay. Usually what you have, you're going to have school grades are going to be down. Okay. Children with ADHD are not dumb. They're very, very smart. They just have a brain that is wired differently than our brain. I'm a little ADHD, I think. I was never diagnosed because I'm always doing more than one thing. And then doing there, running there, because I have kind of a high level of energy. And then since I'm able to achieve, so it's not a problem. Is when the child is not able to achieve, okay? The hyperactivity, well, let's take hyperactivity. There is restlessness, always doing something. When other children are working, he or she will come and annoy them, provoke them, distract them, okay? Never seems to attend to the task at hand, but attending to something else. Okay, that's the hyperactivity. In terms of the inattention, you say something to the child. The worst thing, by the way, you can do with children and even adolescents is to talk with them from the other room. You always want to come close to them. If it's a child, you want to establish eye contact, go down to their level, and tell them what you want to tell them. And if you find that if the child does not follow through and implement what you are asking them to do, okay, then begin to ask the child to repeat what you are asking them to do. That's a sign of inattention. It means that the child hears noise, not noise. The child hears the word, but the words are not translated into meaning, okay? So, and then you have to do it a few times for you to actually get the child's attention that this is what I want you to do. So what you do for that, as I said, you kind of get down, establish eye contact, talk to the child. So if you see a child not following up on instruction, that's a sign that there may be some attention problem. You would probably get notes from the school teacher saying that the child seems like he or she is daydreaming, okay, and then not attending to task. Okay, these are some indications that you may want to further. You may want to look into it further with a professional person who will do a standard evaluation, have you fill out some questionnaire. The child is likely to be very disorganized, very forgetful. I work with a young man. He was 8 years old. He would do the homework. His parents fight with him to do the homework. Guess what? The homeworks never reach the teacher. He used to lose them between the time his parents drop him in school and the time he gets to class. And sometimes mom will find the homework in his backpack. Tout chiffon, we're in his backpack. So you have that forgetfulness, poor organization, impulsivity, okay? Always getting into trouble and then trying to get out of it because they don't think about the consequences of what's going on. Yeah. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dutes, and to all our friends and colleagues here. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you. And as you see in the, we want to thank you, Dr. Dutes. This was wonderful. We learned a lot. The audience is really saying that they learn a lot. So we will continue the dialogue. And as you join us as a new member of LCS, or like, we're going to.
One more thing, please. Can I just say one more thing in closing?
Yes, sir.
I don't want people to leave you feeling that Haitian parents are doing a good job. It's not the parents, it's the experience. It's the trauma of the immigration process. That's how we have to look at it. It's a task for all of us Haitians that we confront and that we have to deal with. In my work here in Central Florida, the parents that I have met across all social class are doing a banged up job. And then we can see it because our children, they are being successful. But there is a small group of us that seems to be stuck. Okay, and then we're hoping through this education to get the information out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much again, Dr. Dutes. Thank you so much to our friends, and we will see you soon. Don't forget to join LCS. We have the information for you. We can, you just, you can join us at www.louverture@lcs.org. Thank you so much, and until next time. Thank you.